to the Shop, episode 185, exploring the Marzocco Cafe with Amy Hattemer and Carolyn Reddy. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have not yet subscribed to Keys to the Shop, go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and that way you'll always be up to date. And as always, if something resonates with you in these episodes, it'd be awesome if you could share these with a friend or friends in the coffee industry. We can spread the love around and spread the information around. That'd be really awesome. And also, if you have the opportunity to leave a rating or review for Keys to the Shop on iTunes, that means so much. It really helps us in the podcast rankings, helps people find the show, and it's also super encouraging to see your reviews and ratings, and always want to be doing a great job for you all. So thank you ahead of time for that. Now, today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful people over at Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the world's leading specialty coffee equipment suppliers. And what they're all about is curating the best equipment from all over the world to match it perfectly with the needs of their customers, whether that's home or commercial. So for us in the Keys to the Shop audience, we're talking about if you're opening a coffee bar, if you're expanding your coffee bar, you want to upgrade your equipment, this is the place to go for commercial equipment, and not just espresso machines, grinders and brewers, etc. They have the best in those categories, but also things like under-counter refrigeration. That's what you need in your cafe as well. Prima helps you out in that respect also. And when you go to their website, prima-coffee.com, you'll find an amazing selection, but also an amazing resource in their written materials and in their videos to help you use the equipment well, brew better coffee, and in the end, that's really what they're all about, is equipping you to make awesome coffee every time. So go to prima-coffee.com for all of your equipment needs. Let them know that you heard about them on this show. Again, that's prima-coffee.com. This episode is also brought to you by the folks who are leading the charge in plant-based beverages for your cafe, and that is the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is a line of plant-based performance beverages that are designed with a professional barista in mind. In fact, side by side with professional baristas to make sure that what ends up on your counter performs the way that you would want it to in a specialty coffee setting. You could be choosing the soy, almond, oat, rice, coconut, whatever you end up choosing for your cafe. You can count on it having an amazing texture that you can make latte art with or whatever. It takes the heat from steaming very well, and it produces a beverage whose focus remains coffee forward, which is really important. And they just really think of everything over at Pacific. So I would encourage you to go to pacificfoods.com to learn more and get this in your store. Try it out with your coffee. Let your baristas try it. Let your customers try it and see how people love this product. They're a leader in this area for a reason, and they'll do wonders for your cafe as well. So go to pacificfoods.com. Just click the link in the show notes here on this episode, and I know you'll enjoy what they bring to the table over at Pacific. All right, so today is a really fantastic episode. It is so critical that any of you who are in a training position or in a position to talk to your team and guide a team to a better workflow, a better project management, or whatever it is, if you're in charge of a group of people and you're tasked with executing a rush, a catering event, or just a really a well-functioning cafe, this is an episode that is kind of like a masterclass in change management, in flexibility, and in just downright excellence in the ability to communicate well and learn from experience. We're talking with the two people who are in charge of the Marzocco Cafe in Seattle, Washington, Amy Hattemer and Carolyn Reddy. They are the ones who are managing this mammoth operation. And I say mammoth like not necessarily the footprint of the cafe, but the task that they are given is to, every 4 to 6 weeks, they are turning over the cafe to a new roaster a resident roaster, as they call it, and basically opening a new cafe every 4 to 6 weeks with different coffees, different workflows, different talking points, different vision, all of that stuff with their core team. You can imagine after almost 4 years of doing this that they have something to share with us about how to manage these types of changes. And for most of us, we are not in a position where we change things very often. And when we do, it can be kind of stressful. Since they have done this with such concentration and such finesse, they're experts in this, and we get to benefit from basically this lab of how to latch onto a vision, communicate it properly, care for your team and the customers and the people who you're representing in the roasted product all at the same time. There's so much to learn here, and both Amy and Carolyn do a fantastic job in giving us some insights that will absolutely make your operation run way better. I'm so excited to be able to have talked with Amy and Carolyn, and so impressed with what they and their team have been able to accomplish over there at La Marzocco. So there's a lot here, and I encourage you, listen carefully and learn as much as you possibly can, and listen for what you can apply in your cafe. There is a ton here. Let's get right to the conversation. Here now is my interview with Amy Hattemer and Carolyn Reddy of the La Marzocco Cafe. All right. Well, Amy, Carolyn, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm so glad to get a chance to talk with you both today.
Thank you.
We're glad to be here.
This concept of the La Marzocco Cafe has fascinated me since day one. It's almost 4 years now, right, that the cafe has been in operation?
Yep, it's been 3.5 years. It'll be 4 years in April 2020.
Wow. And this is, I mean, the fascination of this is obviously because of the resident roaster program and rotating people every month. We have so many questions about that for this interview, and we're going to kind of do a deep dive into those things. What was the catalyst for this? I know, Amy, you were kind of on the ground floor of project management for this event or for this cafe. What was that planning process like, and how did this come to fruition?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of where to start without starting at the dinosaurs, which is usually my problem with telling stories. But our American ownership and leadership that has been a part of La Marzocco since 1978, it's essentially comprised of 3 men, John, Joe, and Kent. And they were approaching retirement about 6 years ago when I first met them, maybe 7 years ago. And Joe in particular was thinking about this idea for a legacy piece. You know, he had been part of La Marzocco himself for 4 decades and was thinking about, kind of coming to the end of this part of his journey with it. And over 4 decades, he had watched as the La Marzocco company became a brand that people associated with. He started to see baristas tattoo the logo on their bodies, and it definitely, it made him think like, people connect to this. But there's maybe a smaller window of folks who get to connect with it, because if you're in the coffee world, then you get to connect with it. I think a lot of us, have a relationship to La Marzocco. When I started working in coffee 10 years ago, my husband learned to look in the window of any shop and be like, oh, they don't have a La Marzocco, let's not go there. And so, there's kind of a periphery relationship to La Marzocco. But if you're not in the coffee world, you don't necessarily have that connection or get to. So he was thinking about, like, how do I create a space where folks can come and connect with the story of La Marzocco and coffee and that continuing conversation. And meanwhile, KEXP, which is a local radio station here in Seattle, they've been in Seattle since 1972. And they too, much like La Marzocco, while based in some part in Seattle, have this global reach because you can stream KEXP around the world, and KEXP is publicly funded. So KEXP was moving into a new space, and they were gaining 5 times the amount of space as their old studio. They went from 5,000 square feet to 25,000 square feet in their new space.
Oh my.
And so, yeah, and so they knew with all of this space, all of the stuff they were going to do that was going to be bigger and better than their old studio, they wanted to include a space for the public because it's publicly funded, and they knew for sure they wanted coffee. But it's kind of hard to pick which one coffee company you'd want to work with, especially when you rely on support from varying different coffee companies. But someone at KEXP just knew the folks at La Marzocco just down the way in Ballard. And so they reached out just to say, we're thinking about this new thing that's going to happen in the future. Do you have any ideas? And little did they know that Joe had been thinking about this idea as well. And so Joe wasn't thinking that it would be coffee service, that it would be a cafe setting, but the things just clicked and they came together. So Joe was like, yeah, we could do something super unique and do what I vision for creating a space for people to connect with La Marzocco's story and coffee at large. But they also wanted to, create something unique in terms of coffee service. So I got to meet Joe, who had this, his wheels were turning with this idea. When I came out from Philadelphia, I worked for Joe Coffee, the company, not the man, in New York and in Philadelphia. And so in Philadelphia, I was opening 2 stores for Joe Coffee. And I came out to Seattle to take tech class in the Strata EP. And that's when I met the La Marzocco team. And I think I speak for many people that this was a company I had an absolute crush on. And so to come and to meet these people that were super down to earth and to take these classes and to learn more about the equipment. And I mean, to be honest, to be the only woman in my class and just to feel pretty empowered. I was smitten with the company. And I think that it mostly is because I ran the Grand Central Terminal Joe Coffee in my 20s, that kind of sparked something for some of the La Marzocco team members that were like, let's keep an eye on this girl that can run a super busy cafe in New York. Let's keep an eye on her for this project. And so I'm super grateful for that opportunity. And they kept an eye on me, and Joe and I started talking about this project, and he talked about it as a potential, this may or may not happen because KEXP was still trying to get their funding. And so, but then he and I talked for about a year, and then he called me in Philly and was like, this project's happening. Are you in? And I absolutely was. So then that all came together then was that I got to join La Marzocco in 2014 in November. And so I got to start to learn La Marzocco. I got to work with the sales and marketing teams. I was very lucky. I got to travel to Italy, go to our factory. I brought architects to Italy with me. I got to go to Tanzania to a farm that we work with.
Wow.
And I got to learn everything about La Marzocco. And then I joke that I had my traveling tent show where we at different coffee events would host people and talk about this crazy idea we had where imagine a place where you can get coffee from different coffee roasters around the world and you can learn about La Marzocco and you can work on our home machines and you can teach classes and we can host events and, kind of all these ideas. So just to plant the seed in the coffee community's mind that it was happening. And then when we had planted that seed enough, when I then went to the 12 roasters that we wanted to work with at year 1, they knew what I was talking about. So I was like, okay, so you've heard me talk about this project that we have, and we'd love for you to join us as one of our first year roasters. So that was how we carved out the first year. We picked equal parts large domestic partners that we've worked with for a long time, smaller, unique partners that were domestic to the U.S. that were doing super unique things, but were pretty small at the time, and then some of our global partners to really just that first year tell the story of who La Marzocco is, and so we then started to carve it out, and again, I started in November 2014 and was able to bring the amazing Carolyn Reddy on as our first team member in August 2015. And we opened in April 2016. So that's kind of the overarching kind of big brushstrokes.
No, that was fantastic summary of how that came to be. And if I was one of the people that was listening to you talk about it, it'd be like, okay, we'll see if this happens. It sounds like a really kind of pie in the sky idea. And the fact that it's been going on for almost 4 years now, it's just like, man, it has been obviously something that resonates with a lot of people. Carolyn, what was your impression of this? Had you been hearing about this from Amy, and then when you joined the team and came on board, kind of what was your experience with this concept, this cafe?
I hadn't really been hearing about it, but I'd been working for Stumptown here in Seattle since 2008, and so being part of a team of Stumptown and kind of one of La Marzocco's customers, but also having the unique opportunity to do that here in the same town as the La Marzocco headquarters. Over the years, I'd had interaction with La Marzocco. They'd come out and done events about the equipment or brought people from the factory or engineers or designers. And so I had the opportunity to get to know La Marzocco as well, not just as the equipment, but as people and as a company. And was also fairly enamored of the company and kind of the values that I saw, not just in both in the equipment and in the people. I thought that was pretty striking, that I could see the values demonstrated in the equipment I used, and then it was mirrored in the people I interacted with. And so I really appreciated the company. And when I was looking for what was next after Stumptown, in my head, I was like, the only thing I can think of that I'd want to do is work for La Marzocco. I'm not sure who else I'd want to work with right now. Like, maybe there's something out there I'm not thinking about, but this would be my number one. And but I was like, but I don't know what I would do for them. I didn't necessarily know of a role that would make sense for my experience and what they needed. But I also, while I was kind of in that last maybe, I guess, year or so while I was at Stumptown started supporting KEXP through donation of coffee, and also worked with La Marzocco to supply a fresh espresso machine for the kitchen at KEXP, where they would make coffee for volunteers during the donation drives, or make coffee for bands that would come in to play. And I was kind of given that account, as it were, to go over and make sure anybody that I could find knew how to use the machine properly, clean it, knew how to brew coffee, some of those basic, because I did training, like wholesale and retail training. And so I would go over and do that. And then I would also go make coffee during the donation drives or make coffee for bands. And so it was a really fun aspect of my job at the time, at a point when I was getting, it's doing wholesale training. If you do the same Espresso 101 over and over again, the people are always exciting. It's always exciting to be able to equip people for their jobs better, but the content can sometimes get a little bit boring if you aren't finding ways to change that interaction. And retail training was more varied and was still exciting, but it was really nice to add this other component of just going over and interacting with this nonprofit. And I had worked briefly for arts nonprofits in the past, and worked for one that was at a rough point in its institutional life, and everyone seemed disconnected from the art that they were engaging with. And, so I'd seen some of the fatigue that can come of being an arts nonprofit. And I really appreciated that when I was going to KEXP, everyone I interacted with there was still really excited about the music that they were playing, the bands that were coming through, the community that supported them. And so I felt a lot of life and vitality there. And it was a really refreshing part of my job to interact with them. And so as La Marzocco was kind of gearing up for this project, Amy and I started to interact, and I think just developed a really awesome relationship where we realized oh, hey, here is another incredibly talented woman coffee professional who has some of the same ideas I do about relating to people, being just kind and gracious to people, kind of inviting them into coffee in the industry. And so when, I can't remember exactly how it went down, but when Amy was like, let's have a conversation, I was like, yep, I'm listening.
Nice. So your roles are what? What do you do at the cafe, the both of you, and what does that look like on a daily basis?
So I think I will also say that in our own ways, Carolyn and I are kind of averse to titles for different reasons and boxes and pigeonholes. But I will also say that I think, it's something that as women professionals, I feel like, well, I should just speak for myself. As a woman professional, I think I oftentimes are like, I don't need a title. That's fine. I'm just going to, put my head down and work hard. But I think that I do need a title. I think that we do. I think we need to demand kind of the same respect as our male counterparts do. I say that just to say that those are thoughts I've been having. But because Carolyn and I in our own ways are kind of averse to titles, things have just happened organically. So I will say that, in many ways what I do is I'm the program director of what we're doing. That's what we've evolved into. I started as the manager of the La Marzocco Experience team. That's the name of our team of exceptional coffee professionals. So I manage that team, but I really oversee it all and kind of, take the burden of having the final say. Whereas in many ways, what we've evolved into, and I'll let Carolyn speak to this as well, but, we've evolved into the fact that Carolyn is doing a lot of the day-to-day team and cafe management, so that it's more realistic to oversee kind of this continuing unique platform. And also have just kind of a healthy balance, because it was a wild west in the beginning where, there were a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of things that, I just had to kind of create in my head before I could even delegate it. So now we've come to this really nice space that's a little bit more manageable. I'm essentially working as our program director, and Carolyn is working as our day-to-day manager. But Carolyn has a lovely sports reference I know that she's used before.
All right, let's hear it.
Well, when we were first talking, we were, talking about what our roles would be like. And I mean, for me, to go back a little bit, the concept was exciting to me because I have like many people in the coffee world, I have a bachelor's degree in fine arts, and thought I would work in the arts nonprofit world, and wanted to pursue a career in kind of museums and that arena. And so it's really interesting to me when Amy started talking about the concept that this was going to use my experience in coffee, my experience in management, my experience in training and engaging with people, my experience in like working on kind of like the wholesale front in terms of like setting up new cafes and new accounts and some of that that work that it takes to get something off the ground. So it's going to use that, but it was also going to be able to start tying back in the idea of an audience comes in and we engage them around some concepts, which I think is the core of a museum, is you bring people in to a place that isn't school, that isn't necessarily home, and they come in looking to have oftentimes an experience with each other, a social experience with each other, but also encounter something new. Encounter a new art object or a new concept, or encounter some history or whatever it is. And so through the experience we create, people are coming in and they're learning about La Marzocco, but they're also learning about coffee. They're learning about coffee professionals, and we're really welcoming them into this industry. But it was going to tie some of those interests together. And then when we first started talking about the actual nuts and bolts of how it would work, and it was like, okay, well, someone has to order milk. And I was like, uh-oh. And so in my head, I was like, am I going to be an assistant manager, which sounds like a job I've done before, like a role that I already got bored of. And I have a tendency, I think, to get a little bored sometimes if I don't have opportunities to keep learning and growing, or to kind of change what we're doing. And so in that initial conversation, Amy read my face and was like, no, okay, you don't need to be an assistant manager. And so the joke came up that if Amy was general manager of the team, I was Coach Reddy. I was team coach. And so for me, I think, I remember being an assistant manager and trying to figure out how I wanted to manage people and seeing other people doing it and not necessarily seeing myself reflected there, not necessarily feeling like they're what they were presenting as a leader and as management were my strengths, or things that I was super comfortable with. And I pushed and challenged myself, but I also was like, I don't really know if that's how it's going to look. And that's why moving into training and education felt like a more natural fit. But I also think I learned a lot more about management through the viewpoint of education. And so the way I look at managing a team and managing people has a lot more to do, and the way that I think my strengths are suited to it has a lot more to do with almost facilitating or kind of creating a place where people's capacities are seen and recognized and encouraged. And so I think that's why the coach metaphor it's a good joke, but it also really is like, I think, an apt way to describe the kind of leadership that I get excited about and that I think I'm best suited to. And so it's been really fun working with Amy, because Amy's goal is in a lot of ways to do the same thing, is to say, what are your capacities? What strengths do you bring to the table? How can we help develop those? Because one, it makes the day-to-day of each individual better if their capacities are seen and if they're developed, but also the team trying to do such a strange concept can't afford to not use everyone's capacities. Like, it's so easy to get burned out and exhausted with constant change. So we do really need to be able to figure out, to look at each person and say, like, what strengths do you have? What capacities do you have? What do you want to learn? What are you excited about learning? How can you be another set of eyes, another set of hands, and another brain, another, another well of insight into how to do this better?
It sounds like a lot of what you're describing here is right along the lines of what the cafe's intention from the beginning was to facilitate and provide a platform for all these different experiences that people express their brand through La Marzocco. They express it through the machines, and it's all unique. It's all happening under one roof now at the cafe, and you're providing this facilitation for not only your staff but the resident roasters as well. And you hit on something there that I think I want to talk a little bit more about, which is really, I think, one of the main questions that somebody has when they think about this concept, which is how hard it must be to always be in a state of change, and what kind of things you look for in people that you bring onto the team. Now you've got yourself, Carolyn, and you got Amy. You're like the core leadership team there, and building people around you that share those same values. How do you go about that? Because I think I shared this with you before we started recording, that as I talked about, like, hey, I'm really excited to interview these folks from La Marzocco Cafe, and here's the concept. People are just like, man, that sounds terrible. Like, as a barista, sounds amazing as a brand, right? But it must take a special individual. How do you go about finding these folks, and what does that kind of training look like?
Yeah, for better or worse, my interview process is typically to say, okay, I'm going to let you know everything about this job that I can, including how hard it is. And I try to like lay it all out there. I try, which is, you can't completely do that, but I try to say, like, this is what we do. This is what it looks like to work here. And that combined with, having a conversation with someone, I joke that if I explain to the best of my ability how hard this job is, and you are not, you don't come across as an unstable individual, and you still want it, you're probably you're probably the right fit. And so I know that that's not a very beautiful way to put it, and Carolyn may be able to describe it a little bit better, but to me, it's really just a matter of meeting folk and chatting with them. And if you've been following what we've been doing for a while, you probably have some insight into what we do. But then when we sit down and we explain what it takes to do this, like the day-to-day that, we hire people who have enough experience in coffee that they already speak the language of espresso extraction and milk steaming and drink building and hospitality. Like the cafe stuff, that day-to-day, keep your cafe humming, that has to be second nature to our team. So if you come with that skill set, then what we do is we don't want to micromanage you in that capacity. We'll continue to have conversations about how we can continue to do all of that better. We meet monthly to to have small and large conversations as a team, but we're going to rely on you and trust that you know what to do in a cafe setting. And then, so that if that's the case, then what we do is we then ask that our team is constantly communicating and letting us know how the residency is going, how things can get better. And then when the next residency is about to launch, we share information on Slack. We use Slack and new channels for each residency to share information. And it's not just Carolyn and myself. Carolyn and I work very closely with the partners in residence, but then we have, as Carolyn described before, over time, we discover what our team is excited about and where their skill sets are. And so we bring them into the fold and we delegate things for them to do. And we've got a team member, Max, on our team who takes all of the final details of a residency that we've worked out in a spreadsheet with our partners in residence. And then Max synthesizes that information and shares it on Slack. So Max is a key part of that. Then we rely on our team to read through that and to do the pre-education and the learning. And then we have a 1.5 hour training. And then we load in, load out, and then we launch as a new residency. So I describe all that to our team and let them know what it means. Like, do you feel confident that you would be able to be autonomous enough? Do you feel confident enough that you would be able to communicate, where your strengths are? Can you say, hey, I don't know this, and feel okay about announcing what you don't know, so that you don't just get swept under the rug and then 3 months later you're like, yeah, I never learned how to do that. So those are the conversations we have that are like, let me tell you how crazy this thing is that we do. Let me talk to you about the skill sets that are important. And then it's just the human conversation and interaction. And for me, ever since I was able to start building teams back in New York when I became a manager, it was super important to me to hire people that were just kind of had really good work ethic, as much as I could, decipher that in our first conversation in an interview. If you have a good work ethic and you seem like a good person, you're probably going to be a great team member, because we're only going to be better by our differences. I'm not going to hire a team of people that all are on the same spectrum of personality. I'm not going to hire, people that are only like under one astrological sign, or that look a certain way so that our customers feel like, cool, this is a hit cafe, or, this is whatever it is that people may hire for that, I know that people do that. And I know that for some people that works, but to me, it's like, if we can hire people just because they're good people and they seem like they'll have a good work ethic, and then create an environment that'll allow them to feel comfortable in their own skin and step out of their comfort zone in some ways and say like, hey, I'm going to try this new thing. We're going to continuously learn from each other, and it's going to make this whole thing easier. So what we look for is basically just, are you not afraid? Are you not scared off by what I just described? And do you seem, based on the questions you ask and the way you communicate with us, like, do you seem like you're going to be a team member that can contribute to this in some way, just by bringing like who you are to the table? And what we've learned over time through our amazing team members by listening to them is that, we've started to have that if we interview someone, and Carolyn and I are like, yeah, we'd like to introduce this person to our team, we'll then schedule some time for them to come in and talk with our team. So Carolyn and I will cover the floor while a new potential hire is sitting out in the gathering space with our team, and they're chatting. They have an opportunity to talk with each other, and the potential new hire can ask questions. Our team can ask questions, so we can get their feedback as well. And then part of that, it's like we then have them join us behind the counter, because that will allow them to also ask more questions or have a better feel for it. So we give them an apron and we show them where the dish pit is, and we just start, why don't you just join us for an hour behind the counter? Because that also will help you get on your feet and get comfortable and have those conversations while you're moving around the space. So we've learned over time to add that to our team as well. Usually by the time Carolyn and I have introduced a potential new hire to our team, I don't think we've ever had our team be like, nope, I don't like that person. It's usually just, an affirmation of what we saw in them as well.
Wow. That really, it would go a long way to build trust as a team member. If I was on your team and you introduced a new person to me and the rest of the team, like I feel respected when I'm considered, and the fact that this person is going to work side by side with me, and I have the opportunity to, you say it has never happened, but if I had the opportunity to say no or voice a concern, that's a luxury that a lot of baristas just don't get.
Yeah.
And I get the feeling that if somebody is averse to change, somewhat maybe based on the idea that change is not always handled very well in most cafes, or at least the communication structures and the systems and stuff like that are not in place to make it as seamless, and the feeling like you're being cared for might just feel like you're being thrown into the fire, trying to drink from a fire hose. And you described some of the systems that you have to really lock this in place and make it work seamlessly for the people who are responsible for executing it. I wonder, what else do you do in communication and systems that you think is integral to the success of this model and to the welfare of the people tasked with carrying it out?
I mean, I think this is less a system explicitly, but something that I think about a lot in terms of culture, and I try to be explicit about it too. Like I think one of the ways to culture doesn't happen by accident. And I think one of the ways to impact culture and create culture is to talk about it, is to model it, is to like use the same language over and over again, is to invite people to participate in it. And so one of the things that's, I think, central to us as a culture is the concept of learning mode. And so that is to say that like the reason we're not super uncomfortable with change is, one, when we hire, we let people know there's going to be change. And we want to know that they're enthusiastic about it, that maybe what they've experienced at other cafes is that things don't change enough, is that they feel things get stale or they don't have the opportunity to learn new things. So they're already excited about the concept of learning. And so then when they join our team, we have to find a way to approach change as something that is exciting and learning as something that's a continual process. And we have to find a way to not be interested only in perfection. We have to look at like, how do we strive towards excellence, but not necessarily perfection? Because we find that one of the things that's very stressful is if we all hold ourselves to a really high standard. I think that's a common thing about all of our team and about anyone who tries to excel in their work. But if we hold ourselves to perfection and then get really upset at ourselves when we don't meet that standard of perfection and get really critical of ourselves or others, that's a really stressful way to work with learning or with change. And so for me, the other framework for it is one that says, anytime we are working on something new, we're building capacity. And each time we practice it, we increase our capacity. And the way to encourage that is to call out our strengths and our ability to meet that capacity, and to be encouraging of each other instead of critical, and is to be compassionate and empathetic with each other instead of critical. And to think about things in terms of, all right, we've taken in new information or we've tried a new model. We're going to have some time to act on it, then we're going to have some time to reflect on it, and then we're going to be able to make changes. And then we'll reflect on those changes and see how they work. And so to kind of put into the place this idea, this kind of balance of, we do the best we can when we start a new residency. We learn from the roaster. They do training with us. We put a lot of work into setting things up physically in the cafe, setting up systems in the cafe for the new residency. And then we know that launch day is going to be challenging. It's also going to yield a lot of fruits in terms of learning. There's a lot of things that will come up that we wouldn't have been able to think of before. As hard as we try and as great as our brains are, like none of us are going to actually see what will happen until we do it. And so to be able to have some grace for each other and for ourselves on that first day, and to be able to kind of have the trust to pause our initial reaction of like, oh my God, this is different. This is really hard, or this is bad, or this is the wrong way to do it. And instead try to reflect back on like, okay, wait, what was the core message of this resident? Are we doing things that are living up to that core message or to our core values as a team of how we treat people? Like those are the essential things to hold on to on that day one, but to also start to note all the things where we're like, we could improve this. And so this gets down to a system or a structure. We try to have an individual on launch day, and we've had 2 people do this on our team, whose job it is to be a scribe, as we call it. So their job is either they're working most of a shift, or they're not physically scheduled into a typical cafe shift, but they're jumping on the floor for periods of time to cover breaks. So they're engaging with the new setup in the new residency, and they're the one taking down questions. And then they're the one asking the resident representative who's there, or asking the team, like, what are your thoughts and feedbacks? And so they're a really great way to collect some of those initial reflections and to clarify some things that can easily be clarified. And then we also go through what they produce is a document, basically a working document that says, like, okay, here are the things that maybe weren't already posted on Slack before we launched. Here are some reminders of things that maybe were. Here's some new learnings that we have on day one. And then the team needs to read that, especially before that first busy weekend. And then we also know that busy weekend is going to be another chance to test out our new setup, to test out our new residency, to learn a lot. And then our staff meeting is always scheduled after that first weekend at some point during that week. And so depending on the complexity of the residency, we may spend a lot of time in that staff meeting reflecting on what's going well and what's not going well in that residency. And I think for me, a part of that culture of learning mode is to make sure that we're never just talking about what's not working. That's a really rough trap to be caught in mentally.
Right.
Only look at what doesn't work, to only be critical of ourselves or each other. And so I think it's very important to say, like, what are we doing well? What is working really well? What has been successful? And give ourselves the opportunity to see and celebrate those little victories, as well as say, like, okay, and what can get better? When we talk about who we hire, I think the other thing I would add is just, I think we really look for people who are thoughtful. So as we're having a conversation with them, we're looking to see how they respond to what we're saying, how they respond to the concepts. When they come and do their work behind their counter with us or talk with our team, which was something that one of our team members brought to us. Leah had seen it before and they suggested that we do it. And so again, like, we wouldn't have come up with that on our own, but we value listening to those suggestions. And so we were able to bring that on, and it's really fun to watch, like, how people interact. And I think if we see that new potential hire is thoughtful, it's going to go a long way to, are they going to be able to listen to that resident in training and say, like, these are the core things that are really important about this resident or to this resident. Are they going to be able to ask really great questions during training? Are they going to be able to represent that resident well as La Marzocco? And so it's really cool to have thoughtful team members. And I think one of the things at one point early on that we tried, and I don't think we've really had to keep up because I think it actually just had an impact, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, but maybe it worked, is we asked that after training, everyone come up with like a 1-sentence summary of, like, what's the thing you took away? Because I think, again, if you're listening and trying to internalize that information and be thoughtful about it, you're going to come away with your own ability to feel empowered to reflect on what's happening and to say, like, I'm going to move this. Wait, hold on. Maybe I won't relocate this, milk pitcher setup because maybe there's a reason it's there. Let me think back through what I know about this residency. Let me think back through why we might have changed it. So kind of really encouraging everybody to own the spirit of the residency just as much as Amy or I might, and then to be able to feel kind of empowered to act on that and to reflect with it and to kind of work with those ideas just as much as a manager would. The ability to be thoughtful about things and to kind of work with concepts and then carry them into action is really essential for our team.
Well, it's really great. I feel like the opposite of thoughtfulness would be just assumption and, having the just base answer to everything and not going deeper. It seems like a challenge to have to switch that mode every month, of course. One of my questions about that is the intersection of authority, where you have a resident roaster who wants their coffee and their concept and their values that you were just talking about represented to the people who are coming to the cafe to experience their coffees, often from really far away places. So it's a really expensive trip for some of these folks, right? But then you have your team and you've got the core group there that remains there. And then there's the standards that you both have instilled in them. So how does that Venn diagram of authority and representation of standards and values work? Like where does one start and the other begin?
That's a good question. I think definitely the roasters or the residents as they come in, one of the things, like we look to them for the coffee service. And so that, that comes down to like how to dial in a pour over every morning. Like, so there are kind of really functional aspects of like making sure their coffee and their brand is well represented. That is really important to us. And it's a collaborative process that we engage in with them over the course of many weeks before we launch. Because I think, it's having been in the role of coming in as like a wholesale trainer, it's really important that they can show up here with potentially different water and maybe a different grinder than they use. And in a day or two, be able to come up with something where they're like, yeah, that tastes good. That tastes like my coffee. That's well extracted. I know that this is going to present well. So it's really important for us that they have that ability. But then in terms of like how, like actually managing staff, like actually making sure that their basic needs are met so that they can fulfill their job, that's our responsibility. And that's something that we continue. If there's a moment where those seem to be, maybe conflict is too strong a word, but like if those are intersecting in a way that seems confusing, we kind of have to navigate it case by case, but also making sure, I think for both of us, it's really important that our staff, as Amy said, can feel comfortable in their own skin, that they feel empowered to be able to do their job, they feel empowered to be themselves. And so I think there's certain lines in terms of if anything that a resident is asking would impact that like safety and comfort, that's where we would draw a line. That's not usually the case. Usually a resident would come in and say like, hey, your team's really talented baristas and we believe that they're going to be able to dial this coffee in well. And we have been around for a day or two and seen that they're all incredibly hospitable. And like, we trust them to kind of present this in a way that makes all of us really look good and really successful. Occasionally they'll have notes about like, this is a thing that we do for customer service. For instance, we had a resident who really wanted us to offer guests water right at the register while they ordered. So that's something where it's like, that doesn't impact, our staff in any negative way. And it's a really fun thing for them to try in terms of like, this is a new approach to the service that we're already trying to do. This is a new way to view hospitality. And it's kind of fun to play with. So they definitely can have a voice in some of the ways we engage with our guests, but it's part of Amy and it's our job to make sure that it's never so prescriptive that our staff would feel uncomfortable, and to kind of check in with our staff if they say like, hey, we want you to dress a certain way all month. And it's our job to kind of collaborate on that and be like, okay, what's practically possible for our staff and what's comfortable for our staff versus what the resident is asking.
Okay, so there's some compromise there that has to be made at a certain point. That's just like, yeah, it's your brand, it's your expression, but at a certain point, it's also going to be somewhat through the lens of the Marzocco Cafe, and that just like the uniform or not uniform thing. Maybe you say yes or no to that, and it won't be like exactly like walking into your coffee shop back home, but it's as close as an approximation as you could possibly hope for in a setting like that.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it doesn't feel like compromise at the end of the day is typically because we have a conversation about it. I actually think that a recent resident that we had is a really great example. Little Waves came in, and we knew that they would. When they put in their application a year and a half ago, we were all really excited about what they sent us, and it was a lot. They clearly put a lot into everything that they do. Their menu was extremely extensive when we were in the planning phase, and we had those conversations with Aurelie, the owner. We said, we talked through service. We said, how important is it to you? Let's go through this. Like, how important is it to you that there are 2 different drinking chocolates on the menu? Because we're thinking about it in terms of a practical standpoint. We've got you with us for 5 weeks. What is important to really execute and share who Little Waves is? And the answer was, it's very important to us. It's like, all right, but, let's keep going down this list. Now, we still have a very large menu that's all very important to you because each thing has been thoughtful. How can we execute it well? Because it's important for us to conversate and to say, so, I don't have a prep kitchen, and I also don't have team members that are only, scheduled for prep time. So how do we do this within our platform? We've got a really incredible group of people, but I don't want to tax them too much that they're kind of miserable and they're not able to offer that great hospitality because they've been stirring, a syrup for 3 hours in the back, and and we work with them, and Aurelie's like, it's super important to me, and I'm going to be out there the entire residency, and I'll make all the syrups if need be. And that's a really wonderfully generous thing that she was able to do. But that's how we're able to figure out what's important to you for us to execute, and how can we do it? So we work through those things. That's what Carolyn and I do. The only time really there's ever compromise is when our partners may have these really great, really big ideas, but we're getting down to the wire and we just have to say no on some things because we don't have enough time to execute it well. Whatever reason, like this ingredient didn't come through that they were working on to finalize what they hoped that recipe was going to be, or the art exhibit they wanted to have just fell through, or whatever, or the band they wanted to play for their launch party they couldn't quite get. It's if we run out of time in the planning process, that's really whenever we have to say no. And it's been an important thing for Carolyn and I to learn how to say no. Because we've learned over time, if we don't have these things buttoned up and fully in line, it's not going to be executed well. So it's a conversation, but as Carolyn alluded to before, it's also, we want to ask why. We constantly want to know the why. And I think if we're coming at that from that question, that allows us to be super thoughtful. So if it's something as simple as like, if you're a barista on the floor and you're like, if you just look at a certain setup when you come into your first day of a launch and you're like, well, this is dumb, I'm going to move this over here. That's not going to allow you to, like, if you give yourself a little bit of pause and be like, well, why is this here? Oh, this actually goes into what I learned about this resident, which is that they, would like to be hospitable and offer certain things to people who need it, but they don't necessarily want it to be out at the condiment station because they don't want to necessarily say, I want you to put this into your drink. But if someone asks for it, we'll have it behind the counter. Like, if you ask that why, and that's what Carolyn and I ask of our partners as well. So if we're going through that launch week and our baristas have questions that we don't know how to fundamentally answer, we'll ask the why, and that will help dictate or help us understand why to execute it a certain way. But sometimes we'll ask that why to our partner and they'll be like, I don't really have an answer. That's fine. And that helps them kind of go through their own repertoire and their own understanding of their own company and their values and ask themselves why. And I think that the why is super important. And it's not to be rude and to be like, well, why do you do it that way? But to say, like, let me know why you do that so I can understand it a little bit better. With Tim Wendelboe, it was like, why don't you offer Americanos? And Seattle, we like our Americanos in Seattle. And we learned that the hard way by not having them on the menu and then having people call us. They'd call the cafe and be like, are you serving Americanos yet? And so it was this really wonderful thing early on in our first year to know, like, our community is engaged in what we're doing and they want to come back when we have that thing that they want us to offer. But, having that conversation with Tim Wendelboe to say, like, why don't you offer it? And he had an answer for it, that the way that their coffee is sourced and roasted and designed, they don't find that it's beautifully executed in an Americano. So what they do have is this, this other offering, this very specific offering on AeroPress that they think tastes like a delicious Americano, and they'd like you to try that. So it's like this constant conversation of why, which I think that's the fundamental thing that we do that allows us and our partners and our guests who walk through our space to be thoughtful.
So this is really a lab that is studying best practices for executing in a high change environment. Like this is something a cafe would never really experience on their own, because you're opening a new coffee shop virtually every single month, and you are learning from the roaster, you're learning from your staff, but you're also learning from your customer. You just mentioned the locals, and I wonder what role their feedback plays in how you decide to move forward for the next residency, things that you've learned from the people who are coming to the cafe to actually interact with the brands and interact with you all.
I think just to jump in, and I'm sure no doubt Carolyn's got a lot of thoughts, the thing that comes to me like first and foremost is that we've learned to do our best to be approachable. And so in the beginning, it was definitely, as we were building it, we were like, all right, we're going to do our best to only offer what our partners and residents want to offer, because what we're trying to do is recreate their space. To say, if you were to go, if you were in Mexico City and you went into Buna, we're going to try and recreate what that space is like, so that you can say, I got to experience this coffee that comes from a completely different culture than one that I have. And so I got to say, like, if I was in Mexico City in this cafe, I'd be able to experience this, which is different, and get to remark on what is different, because that's so cool to say there's no one right way to offer coffee. There's no one right way to offer coffee service. So let's see how they do it in Mexico. Let's see how they do it in Arkansas. Let's see how they do it, but the thing that we've learned over time is that, if we are constantly saying no to our guests, it's kind of hard to be approachable and accessible. And so there are little things that we've done that are not, genius, and they're not making us wonderful people by offering them. But when we have, over time, there are certain things we've been, I'd say decaf is something in particular that's a fundamental that we've learned. We just need to offer decaf. So if we have a roaster that doesn't do decaf, a lot of our international partners haven't done decaf, or if a partner in residence is just like, cool, I'm at the Marzocco Cafe, I'm not going to offer decaf. We say, we ask why. And usually the answer is just, it's not because they're fundamentally against it. Usually it's just, for an international partner, it may be that it's not something that's commonly asked for, so they can't do it well. So we'll say, is it okay if we offer a decaf, if we provide one? Or if it is a partner that already does decaf and they're like, oh, we just thought it'd be cool to not have decaf, and we say, we'd like to be able to offer it, then they're usually okay with it. So, decaf is, I think, a good example of something we've learned over time that we want to be able to offer so that we can still be accessible to more of our audience. And there's little things like that too. Like if chocolate is not some part of your menu, but we know we've got families that come in and they want to have a hot chocolate for their little ones, or they want a hot chocolate for their big ones. We want to be able to say, like, what can we offer that, tea, even if it's off menu, can we offer a tea? So we've slowly learned how to say, will you offer these things even if they're off menu? If you don't have a strong opinion about it, can we offer something, that La Marzocco will source and make happen, just so that if someone asks for it, we can have it. And we're continuing to grow and to learn what that is. But I'd say that the biggest input is that we want to see how we can offer these really unique experiences, but still be approachable and accessible to people who walk through our door to the best of our ability.
I think I've worked in coffee in Seattle since 2008, and I think I was really initially quite surprised at how many people in Seattle were actually very excited about trying something new. Because my experience with coffee and with Seattle, which I don't think is totally out of the ordinary for people with coffee in general, is coffee can be a thing of habit and a thing of comfort. And it's a nice, any kind of hot beverage that's part of your daily life is something that's there to provide you with a thing that doesn't change oftentimes, a thing that you can rely on to start your day while everything else is changing around you. So it's I think if we've worked in coffee at all, we know the impact a good coffee experience or a good drink experience can have on brightening your day or giving you something to look forward to. That really kind barista that you see every day that remembers your drink every day. That's a kind of cafe staple in terms of why people like to go out for coffee every day. And so, especially in Seattle, where I think people do really like know what they like and they like what they like, and they're not necessarily just looking for what's the hot new thing. They often are like, no, I've investigated and I found what I like. I wasn't sure how people would respond to something that changes all the time. And so I think I was really pleasantly surprised by how excited a core group of people were to come and try a changing setup and a changing menu. And it's fun to watch how people do it. Some people will still get their same drink. It's a, 12-ounce latte, or it's an Americano, or it's a straight shot of espresso. Like, it's their core drink, and they don't actually change the drink as long as it's on the menu, but they actually really get excited. They notice the difference. They say, like, that was the best latte in forever from this roaster. They made the difference. The espresso from this roaster really makes a difference in the latte, and I love this resident. Or other people will come in, and I think one of the things we've really learned is the impact of the menu, the actual physical printed menu and how it's designed. And there's a lot of people who they look for the thing that's highlighted on the menu, or they look for the signature drink, or they ask us what's different. And they actually want to try the different thing every time. They want to try the signature drink or the new concept. And so in that collaboration with the roaster, the menu is a really interesting tool. And we really try to kind of communicate with them about that we've noticed that if single origin espresso is at the top of the menu, we're going to serve more of that espresso than we might have if it wasn't at the top. Or we have noticed that things that are off menu that we can still offer won't sell as much as things that are highlighted on the menu. So it's really interesting to kind of watch not just what's on the menu, but even the physical layout of the menu, and how for some people that like that constant change or like to look for what's new, they're going to use that as a way to figure out what they're going to enjoy about this new residency. It's really interesting kind of figuring out who our guests are and who are excited about change, but through a narrow lens of their same drinks all the time, who are excited about constantly changing what's the latest thing, what's this roaster's thing, what are they good at, what is their special drink they're bringing. People who don't even know that we change and are just trying to come in and have a meeting in this really wonderful space. And they come in for every day for 6 months. And then finally, maybe like, we don't have almond milk this month, we have oat milk. And that's the thing that they're like, what do you mean? You had it last week. And that's how they finally learn what our concept is. And so it's really interesting to watch those little moments happen. And sometimes if they have that moment and we are able to explain to them what they do and make it an exciting thing, they're really interested. They're like, oh, I can't believe I didn't know this before. That's a really cool concept. Some of our guests are tourists. They're traveling through Seattle. They're in the neighborhood, and they may not really get a chance to kind of engage completely with the full concept, but they might be really interested about finding something new nonetheless. So yeah, it's really interesting to watch who our guests are and kind of learn who they are and how to meet some of those needs and also stay true to the concept.
So this is, I think, endlessly fascinating because, I mean, it's just such a wonderful intersection of so many different cultures on a regular basis, the customer culture, your staff culture, the resident roasters and their expressions of coffee. It's all really beautiful. And I'm so thankful to have gotten a chance to kind of peek into the operations of this. And so you've done such a wonderful job explaining this to us. In so much of what you've described, every time you say something about your operations or service and learning mode, I'm just thinking, boy, I really hope folks in the audience are taking notes, because these are kind of things that I would benefit from in a regular coffee bar. And that's kind of my final question to you is, what have you learned in executing these things and running this cafe over the years about managing this operation, people, and the quality standards that you feel would benefit regular cafes, those who are listening who are ops managers or head baristas and owners? What kind of things do you think they should take away from your experiences that would help them in their operations?
I think a huge thing that I've learned over the years is to never rest on your laurels, to always be looking for how to set everyone up for success. that, we've talked a lot about how Carolyn and I approach the holistic aspect of this, because that resonates with us and that's how we interact with people. And we have found success with that, fundamentally treat people like they're humans and know that you are also human and fallible. So be open to having those conversations. And as long as you can kind of, demand respect for yourself in the room and in the conversation, then you know that you're both meeting each other in any sort of conversation, whether it's simple or larger. We each come to this table and know that we respect each other with whatever we're about to say. All of that is exceptionally important. But on top, that's riding on top of the rest of it. Like I mentioned before, it's super important that we have people who already speak the language of a cafe. And so, that involves systems. You have to have systems for everything. And I know that sounds crazy because we change everything every 5 to 6 weeks. So how do you have systems? But if you don't have a system for something already, create it. And so there's a lot of things that kind of are through lines from our residency to residency that are part of what we do as a team, that are tools we've learned that we lean upon, that we know how to use. Maybe we have to dust some off because we haven't used them in a minute, but we can refer to them. And so having those systems in place allow us to set ourselves up for success. It allows us to strive towards not feeling relief when we execute a residency, but rather feeling the reward. And so if we've ever felt like, oh God, that residency planning was so hard and now I just feel relief that it's over, then we have to go back and figure out what we need to learn from. What did we do wrong in that? Because what we should feel is we should feel the reward of executing a residency really well. And so I think, and that to me is the barometer for how well we're doing. And we've really learned from it over the years. And man, Carolyn and I have systems. We have lists. We have Excel sheets like you wouldn't believe. We are constantly mind melding and figuring things out and leaning on our team. And you couldn't do any of it without those systems. Those systems allow us to then do the rest of it, allow us to do the human part, because those systems are kind of part of our tool bag. We continue to add to those. And I think that not resting on your laurels, constantly trying to set yourself up for success, creating systems and asking the why, those are the fundamentals to any of this. Because yes, it's a cafe. Yes, it's service. Yes, it's coffee. Yes, it's retail. But at the end of the day, it's actually just human interaction. It's human interaction on every single level of it. And so kind of being good at being a human is what's going to set you up for the rest of it.
I've learned a lot about managing a team, and I've learned a lot from Amy and from Amy's accompaniment in that. And I've learned a lot from our team. And I think the more and more as I think about managing a team of people who are in service, I think, for me, one of the most fundamental things is making it really clear that you are always available to listen and that you are always happy to be asked a question is really important. And I think there's this really interesting interplay between, as a leader, I think you should be humble and you should also be kind of confidently modeling what you value at the same time. And those are interesting things to like balance at the same time. But I think humility and the ability to look back and be like, yep, we didn't quite hit the bar there is really important. And the ability to listen to your staff when they say something that they're like, you're trying to take us into consideration, but you could actually ask us this thing or invite our feedback on this specific thing. And we would have told you like, oh yeah, that makes total sense now, but I didn't quite think about it that way. So I think it's really important to remember that so few of us have seen the kind of leaders and managers that we would want to be. Like, we don't always get to see the perfect model out there. And everyone we've worked with has been just on the way growing and learning. And so the ability to have humility, to listen to your staff, and to go beyond listening, to invite them to participate, to invite individuals, to invite them as a group, to find moments where you're like, okay, this is a time where I can accommodate having their input, and I have a time frame where I get to have their input, or there's something that could change here. And I'm going to try to proactively invite them to participate in this. I think goes a long way. And I think, there are moments sometimes where you don't invite it and it comes up anyway, and you still have to okay, let's be humble and let's listen and let's try to work with this. But I think that it's what we do to be really great at hospitality usually involves an incredible amount of social intelligence and involves a lot of empathy and a lot of sensitivity. And some of those same capacities can make it really easy for us all to get exhausted or have our feelings hurt or to kind of feel a lot of weight of those interactions day by day. So I think working with people and managing people, a big part of that is the ability to feel like your job is supporting people, to feel like your job is figuring out those little ways which with each person and with a team that makes them feel like they can trust you, that makes them feel like they can trust each other, that asks them to be as gracious and kind to each other as they want their teammates to be to them. So I think it's hugely important that they can have that kind of safety of trust within themselves and with you, so that they are free to offer incredible hospitality, so that they're free to say, how can I push myself to get the best possible espresso? I don't think we're able to do that if we're not safe. I don't think we're able to do that if we don't feel like we can trust our team. I think we need some of those fundamental needs met, and it's part of our job as leaders to model that in the way we interact with each other, and to kind of create that space for our team.
Wow. That's all so powerful. I love it. And thank you so much, both of you, for the work you do in pursuing those things in the La Marzocco Cafe. Where can we find more information about this, who the residence is now, and just get in contact with the cafe and all that's going on there?
A really great tool, because there's lots of different channels, that we promote and discuss, and, there's lists you can be on. But I think a really great tool just to succinctly learn everything you can about the cafe is our Instagram account. We're just at La Marzocco Cafe. And I like to point people to that because Jen Callender, who works on our team, does a really good job of communicating what we're up to, and she takes gorgeous photos, and she is really responsive on it. So that's a really great channel for anyone to find what they need to, or to learn how to ask what else. And our current resident is Kuma. They're local here to Seattle, and they've got some really beautiful coffees on the menu. We're featuring a new single origin every week. They have a delicious PSL, pumpkin spice latte,
all right,
on the menu.
Love it.
And yeah.
Very cool.
Let's see, we also have La Marzocco has a blog, and Jen creates some really great blog posts through, let's see, that's on La Marzocco USA, I believe.
It is indeed.
So lamarzocco.usa.com is where you can find our blog, and you'll find blog posts that go through and kind of say thank you to the resident ending and preview the upcoming resident, and kind of gives you a preview to look for. We do have, through La Marzocco Home, we offer some kind of online barista classes, but we also have an events calendar on La Marzocco Home that gives upcoming classes that we do with our home espresso machines, as well as other La Marzocco Home events all over the U.S. So that's a good thing to keep in touch with, especially if you're local and would want to come take a class with us. You can sign up for that on La Marzocco Home.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom here. My head has just been nodding this whole time as you've been talking about these things you've learned, and the insights that you've given are so, so valuable. I really appreciate you both joining us on the show. If you're all ever in Seattle, definitely make it out to the cafe and get to experience all of this firsthand. Thank you both once more.
It's our pleasure.
Yes, it's our absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Well, I want to thank Amy and Carolyn for joining us on the show. Again, thank you so much to both of you for your wisdom, and the insights that you shared are just invaluable. And I would encourage all of you, if you have the opportunity to go to Seattle at any point in the future, definitely check out the La Marzocco Cafe. You can find out more information by visiting their website over at lamarzocco.usa.com. You can also follow them on Instagram over at La Marzocco Cafe. That will give you updates also on who's in as the resident roaster. You get to see what the cafe looks like, the menus and things like that. Really well curated Instagram page. Visit the website as well. And also, if you want to learn more about La Marzocco USA as a company and get a dose of leadership insight, we have interviewed back in episode 89 the general manager of La Marzocco USA, Andrew Dede. And that was a really fantastic interview, a lot of lessons for leaders in there. And you get a sense for the heart of the company that both Carolyn and Amy were so impressed by, that they are working for the company now and loving every minute of it. So episode 89 is the interview with General Manager of La Marzocco USA, Andrew Dede. Again, that's linked in the show notes along with some other recommended episodes. But, for me, the biggest takeaway from this episode was the idea of kind of debriefing with your team after every residency, after every roaster residency. And this is the kind of thing that if you don't do that with your team now, when it's, seasonal, even just seasonally, as you go through different phases of your business throughout the year, if you're not meeting with your team on a regular basis to gather information from them about how things are going and let them contribute to the betterment of your cafe, you're really missing out. I mean, this cafe that they run really can only do it because of the kinds of insights they gain from giving a platform for feedback. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse here or anything, but feedback culture is so real in terms of making an impact on how good you can be and how well your cafe can run. This is just case in point once more, on top of a lot of other great insights. So maybe go back and listen to this episode again, pull out a notebook, take some notes. But you can also get the full transcript for this episode by going to keystotheshop.com, enter your email address at the base of the page where you can click sign me up for the free email. Weekly, we send out the transcript for each main episode, and you also get bonus audio. This episode is no exception. So I interviewed Amy and Carolyn a little bit more with a final question at the end that is available also just for the people signed up for the email newsletter. And again, go to keystotheshop.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address and information, and you'll be signed up for that as well. So a final announcement here is that Coffee Fest, of course, is coming up. That's actually, on the time that I'm recording this, about a week away from happening in Tacoma, Washington, the 15th and the 16th. Of course, Coffee Fest always brings a fantastic amount of value to people who are in coffee retail. It is the best coffee show for retailers by far. And this one in Tacoma, the Pacific Northwest show, is no exception. It is 2 days long. I definitely would encourage you to go to coffeefest.com to find out more information. But when you go there, you're going to also find that there is a seminar happening the day before Coffee Fest starts on the 14th. It's called the Lean Into Leadership Seminar. It's an all-day leadership seminar put on by two amazing professionals. Lisa Farr, who is the founder of Map It Forward, past guest on this show, and the host of the fantastic podcast Map It Forward. Also, the owner of Tiamat Leadership, Jen O'Hare. They will both be leading the charge in this Lean Into Leadership Seminar. It's from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. on the 14th, Thursday, before Coffee Fest Tacoma officially starts on the 15th and 16th. I will link to this in the show notes over at coffeefest.com /leadership is where you should go. Coffeefest.com /leadership. And when you go there, you'll find out some more details about that. But highly encourage you to look into that. Definitely something that could add a ton of value to your business. So with that, that is it for our show. Of course, if you want to reach out to me, you can do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. For any inquiries about consulting or training, or you just want to leave feedback or comments and questions about the show, go for it there, chris@keystotheshop.com. And I hope that you have a wonderful week. Thank you for joining me again, learning about the La Marzocco Cafe. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.